So I'm just going to have a go now at trying to use up the rest of what's on my palette. I'll use the brush again because it's a bit easier. Got some gold up here. And I've got some of this here. I think some of the under painting is still slightly wet. I'm not going to worry too much about that. This is where you start to get the warm working over the top of the cool colours. And where I've scratched out, you'll also see that there's texture on there too. And again, you could just carry on painting with the card if you wanted to, that we used last time. Just going to carry on using the same brush. Hold that so you can see what I'm doing. And again, don't forget to turn the substrate round. So if there's any areas where you don't like the colour, you can always mix it on the actual substrate itself. Picked up a hair there from my brush. Let's get rid of that. I've got quite a bit of this pink to use. I might actually stick it onto here. What you'll find though is if the paint's quite thick, then you're going to get areas where it becomes a bit tricky to apply it because there's a lot of stuff going on under the surface. Like you can see there, it's starting to scratch out. So in order to get this paint up from the palette, I'm just using the brush and then putting it on top of the card. I'm not going to drag some areas like that. Still got quite a bit of that yellow as well. So I can also use this card as a bit of a stamping tool, so I can always go over the top just to create linear marks. Or I might want to just drag like this. Or I might want to pick up a big load of colour and then just lob it on like this. What you end up getting is a lot of stuff going on top of the canvas, which is what you would expect if you keep piling things on top of other things. So as I say, you can either let this dry and then work over the top of it with, say, neutrals or black or white, just to create some different tonal values and some contrast. Or you could also collage over the top. Creating some nice chunky areas here with this, which is quite nice. So a palette knife is also another good tool for scraping this off of the surface of the palette. So you can just use this as a tool to either scrape or to just blob colour on top of things. You can just keep working over the top to create different effects. And tilting things around as well, just to create some variation. I think most of that gold has been used. There's a bit of pale yellow there. So you almost end up with a canvas that looks a bit like a palette, because when we keep working over the top of things, you can kind of see you get warms and cools on your palette, and this kind of mimics that to a degree, which is quite interesting. I think this would actually work quite nicely with some, possibly some kind of bright green and maybe some blacks or some whites or something. Quite liking the marks that have been created here, they're quite interesting. See if I can just use up what's left on here. It's a bit tricky to scrape because I've got texture on top of the palette. Just to create some more marks. So those little linear marks are quite nice. They just break up the surface of the substrate and create a little bit of visual interest. Those directional marks. Like that. And then you might even want to pick up some of the paint and just palette knife it onto different areas. And tidy up an area. Or create a different mark inside of something. So I think in terms of using up the paint on the palette, that's quite an interesting first layer to have. There's lots going on, and there's a fairly good overall balance of warms and cools. There's quite a lot of warms on the surface now, and the cools have kind of gone underneath. But even so, that's something that we can come back to and then create something else from it.